In this demonstration, I will show how it's possible to use Wyse thin clients running the latest ThinOS as well as the latest AVD package on ThinOS to essentially configure that device in a kiosk mode. That is a mode to where the device upon startup will automatically log in with a specific user and password to Azure Active Directory or Entra ID and fire up and open one or more applications of your choosing. What you're looking at right now is my Wyse Management Suite portal screen in my demo environment. And as you can see here, I've got a Dell 5070. I've upgraded the OS version to the latest package, which currently, as of the showing of this video, is 9.4.4123. And I also have the AVD package, the latest and greatest AVD package loaded on that ThinOS. The settings that are specific, of course, there's many things I can put down as far as many policies to configure the behavior of my machine, but the ones that are important to specifically to make sure this thing can auto log in using the AVD as its default broker and launching the app are what I'll show you here. So jumping over to the ThinOS policies, in this case I'm just simply using the device domain policy for my one and only one machine, but essentially the key ones are these. If you go into broker settings, you obviously want, assuming that you want to use Azure Virtual Directory, which is what we do, we want to set that as the default. We then want to use, and we'll get to this in a second, we can actually have it connect to different sessions depending on what we call it. In this demonstration, I'll simply have it fire up a remote app that I have simply called WordPad, which will launch WordPad for the demonstration. But essentially, this would be variable on whatever you call your sessions, whether they be desktops or apps. And by the way, you can have multiples of these. And as you can see, there's all sorts of other things we could manipulate here, but for this purpose we just want the modern ARM v2 and we want to auto connect once logged in to the session. So for the auto login, we have to jump down to login experience, and if we look at login experience, this is where we have to put in the credentials. Now these credentials have to be from real Entra ID or Azure Active Directory, formerly known. Credentials that have access to that remote app in this case, or the shared session, or what have you that you want your thin terminal to launch. And of course I got to put in this password. The assumption also is if you truly want this completely hands-off, you would want to maybe consider exempting it from MFA, multi-factor authentication required, etc. And you can use conditional access policies to do so, and then maybe even lock it down to make sure it's only coming from your thin clients. That's totally up to you. There's other things that you can set, as you can see here, which may or may not be something you want to do, such as, hey, if the thing ever logs off for some reason, go ahead and auto log in again, just to do that. And of course, it'll, every time you reboot, it's going to essentially log in my case, not just log in, but launch WordPad as I showed earlier. Okay, now that we have that, I'll go over to my thin client. It's just a Dell 5070 Wyse thin. The requirement is essentially that it has to, the hardware, the Wyse terminal has to be as fresh enough or new enough to load the latest and greatest ThinOS version that Wyse Dell has, as well as the AVD package, which would sit on top of the latest ThinOS. So as you can see, it's going through its boot motion here. It shouldn't take too long. ThinOS is a fairly, thin operating system. So here we are presented in the login screen. It's figuring out its network, and this is where it starts taking off. I've left these screens on. You can see real quickly that it logged in. It gave you the familiar Azure Active Directory, or now Entra ID login. If you're watching closely enough, it very quickly logged in as our juser1 at gbblab.com. using the password that I've configured. And now what it's doing is it's actually firing up, in our case, WordPad. And so I haven't touched anything. All I did was walk up to the unit and turn it on. This behavior will also rebooting it will just basically log in a fresh session And if for some reason someone walked up and wanted to close the system or close the application or applications that we chosen to auto run once the login is complete, it would essentially do so as well. And so as we're waiting here, in a minute we should get a WordPad. Now again, I touched the screen just to make sure it wasn't frozen. I haven't done anything. So in a minute or in a few moments, hopefully it'll figure out that WordPad is supposed to launch on its own here. Again, logged in as the context user that we've chosen. And there it is. And so without touching it, nothing up my sleeves, nothing behind the curtain, it worked. And to complete this off, because typically most of the time I get into these types of environments where people want to run this because of factories, is usually like one of these, a barcode. And if I simply use the barcode, you can see that even USB direction and everything works just great. Anyway, that's all I had. Thanks for listening.